All right. I wanted to have a little discussion about the quality of life a citizen of Stonewood would enjoy. And to help me make that point, let me show you graphically what kind of tiles we're dealing with here. So in orange, you would have the suburbal zone. Suburbs are the most common tile set in Stonewood. Next, you have the city zones that I have depicted here in red and industrial in yellow. Next is the grasslands, which is a nature tile. And then you will have your forest tiles. Other than that, you have the play with other tile, which isn't really a tile, but I'll graphically depict it here anyway. And then you have home base. For the arguments that I'm going to make, home base and the play with other tiles are, useless. So we'll just, whatever, we'll just, they don't exist for the arguments that I'm going to try to make. Now let's have a little look at the suburbs, right? Suburbs are, in real life at least, right? The majority of people live there. The majority of people live there. If you look at the US, for example, yes, there's a lot of people that live in cities. But, once you go down that list, you have New York City, you have Los Angeles, etc., etc., whatever. Before you're even out of the top 10 not every city in the top 10 most populous places in the U.S. has 1 million population. So it falls up pretty fast, which means that the majority of people live in places like this. Small towns, suburbs, and villages. And that goes for a lot of places around the world, right? There's not a lot of places where the majority of people live in cities. They exist, but for the arguments that I'm trying to make, not so much. So suburbs, let's say 75% of the people live there, right? These people, they play, they work, they need access to services that other tiles provide, right? That indicates the quality of life that these people will have. And because the majority of people in Stonewood will probably live in these tiles, we'll look at it from the suburb tile set for a second. So let's have a look, right? I said earlier, you need a place to play, you need a place for recreation, you need a place to escape from, the living environment. So let's have a little look and see how far away most people will be from nature, right? Grasslands and forests. Now, as you can see, the majority of the suburbs in Stonewood would have access or close access to nature in the form of a forest or a grassland. The baseline here should really be no further than 3 tiles. So if you're 2 tiles away, that's fine. If you're 1 tile away, that's perfect. So as you can see, the majority of the tiles will be in a 1 to 2 tile radius of nature, which is great for the quality of life that the people here will enjoy. Now let's zoom in real quickly on the tile on the left, this one, because that one lives in a vacuum, right? It's a suburb, but it's not surrounded by nature. So these people will have a negative, recreational space. Basically, if you live in that place, you need to either drive very far for you to be able to recreate in nature or to play in nature. So I would say that of all the suburban places in Stonewood, this place is most likely going to enjoy the least of that, which is, a negative point to the quality of life that the people there will enjoy. One negative doesn't automatically make that place not worth living, because I'm going to give you a different example why it's pretty good to live there, right? Check this out. Suburbs in range of cities, right? People who live in suburbs, typically suburbs don't have the services that cities provide. The cities will have significantly more places to dine, to shop, educational facilities, legal facilities, etc., etc. So, yes, that 1 tile might be far away from nature, but it's very close to 2 major hubs. It will enjoy increased access to services. So if you're somebody who doesn't like nature, but does use a lot of services, life could be easy for you over there. Now let's have a look at these 3 tiles, right? They might be very close to nature, but they're very far away from cities, right? So for these people, what does that look like when in your life? What does that look like in the average person's life? These people might, they might want to look into filling their freezer up because the next available store is, a substantial distance away, to where they might want to buy in bulk. They might want to jar. They might want to can things. They might want to, all those kind of things. But other services too. Their kids, they might have to travel a very long distance to go to school, or if they need to, go to work. Work would be far away, and the example of work, city tiles, or major hubs like that, cities typically offer more jobs, right? A lot of the people who live in suburb areas, small villages, towns, they travel into cities during the daytime to work. And that goes into my next point too. Industrial areas. They employ a lot of people. And again, the free tiles over here are very, very far away from them. So my point is that the people who live in these places with the purple circle around it, they have a decreased access to services, job opportunities, but they do have a great access to nature. So whether or not, that might be important, that might not be important to you. These are typically places that will bleed population for a long time, and we'll see, a reduction in infrastructure quality. They will see a reduction in the few services that might be provided. Right, you think about like a library closing, or a school district closing, or two schools merging. Sad stuff. Maybe not necessarily. The topic of what I'm trying to discuss. But the people who live in these free tiles, they probably, these free zones, the people that live in these free tiles probably enjoy the lowest living quality in the whole of Stonewood. Right. Let's go back to the big map. The same arguments, by the way, could be made for city tiles. How far away are city tiles from greenery? People who live in cities, they want to escape and go places, right? They want to have access to jobs. But the people in the city in Stonewood, the way that Stonewood is built, it's very much like, most of the activities that are going on the west. The east side of Stonewood is probably the more poorer side. And if you look at if you apply the same logic that I just applied, you can see that the red tiles, minus the one on the bottom, we'll talk about that in a second, are close to industrial areas, are close to green areas. And, maybe you could make the argument that, for example, this green tile here on the bottom might be a public park rather than an actual grassland, because it is so closely associated with very, 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 infrastructure heavy tiles, where maybe grassland over here could be wild grass. The quality of nature doesn't necessarily matter for the arguments that I'm making. But the argument that I am making is that the people who live in these cities will enjoy significantly higher quality of life than the people who live in these free tiles on the side here, right? If you're somebody who really likes to be in nature, a place like this might be awesome for you, right? But you're not going to get great services. In a place like this, you might not even have a sewer, right? You might be forced to use a septic tank. That's the argument that I'm trying to make. Now, if I look at this map, this zone, this is where you would find launch the rocket, which is that's why it's far away from the rest of the tile set. For argument's sake, we could even ignore that one. Now, would you make the argument that the people in Stonewood, enjoy a very comfortable quality of life? I would say so. The majority of people in this area live on the western side of this map anyway. And I think that they have access to jobs. I think on average, they have access to services. I think they have access to nature for a good part of it all. I would make the argument that yes, I think that people in Stonewood, the residents of Stonewood, have a very comfortable existence. And the problems with the tiles on the right side of the map, the free tiles that have no access to services or industry, depending on how the local government wants to handle this. I mean, jobs can be created and places can be redeveloped. So it's not necessarily that these places will forever be stuck in this vacuum of distraught and further cuts to infrastructure and other spending to cover the lack of tax revenue, whatever. But I would say yes. I would say that for the most part, the people in Stonewood, are comfortable. I think so.